Greetings, everyone. My name is Cameron Payne. Thank you so much for joining us here. We are the medicine hosted by SeekHealing, a Nashville, North Carolina-based nonprofit working on to reduce drug overdoses and heal the trauma linked to the loneliness epidemic. We invite you to make a donation to our organization by texting SeekHealing to 44321 or using the donate button on our event page. Your donation will be used for our extra care program, which assists those most at risk using methods of authentic connection this festival is showcasing. SeekHealing has and always provides the service we offer to our community free of charge. And now we have the interview session with Hilary Jacobs Hendel, who is on SeekHealing's advisory board, and General Nicolaisen, who will be discussing the change triangle, a clinically grounded method for shifting fear-based emotional responses into resilience and confidence. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this weekend, Hilary, as the speaker begins their, excuse me, I read a little too much, my apologies.
It's great to be here. Thanks. Thank you. Oh, there you are.
I'm muted. That's why you couldn't hear me.
Okay.
I just said I've been looking forward to this all weekend.
Me too. Great to see you, Jennifer. It's been amazing the whole weekend. I really enjoyed the listening training and your opening statements. And anyway, I just want to say thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm feeling some amazement that, or just, I think, gratitude that we're finally having a chance to really connect and get to know each other through the course of this event, even though we've been connected and you've been a part of SeekHealing's advisory council for about a year now, right?
Yeah.
Last June or so.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I'd love to get started by just asking you to share a little bit with us about the change triangle and your story, I guess specifically is what I'm interested in, how it all came to be, and when did your interest in all of this begin?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I hear a little bit of background noise. Does anybody hear that?
Yeah, please mute your mic if you have not muted your mic already. And Cameron, if you don't mind, I'm not a host, so can you keep anybody muted that's not muted?
So in a nutshell, not wanting to bore anyone, I mean, I really didn't discover emotions and this idea of like that there was like, you know, I like to connect with people always, but I was 39 years old when I went back to social work school to become a therapist. I was born and raised in New York City. I was raised by a very sort of left brain, intellectual parents. My dad was a psychiatrist, and my mom was a guidance counselor, and I was headed for medical school most of my life. Ended up deciding at the last minute that I would be too anxious to deal with people who were really sick and dying. So I made an abrupt left turn, one of many, went to dental school and had a great education at Columbia. And I think one of the ways that I feel very privileged, I come from an incredibly privileged background, is I had the opportunity to have a great education, and I was a science nerd basically. And I think my emotional story is that I was an anxious kid that had enough support that I dealt with my anxiety by being very productive and doing very well in school. And so the backdrop of that is that all the education I had will sort of, even though I made twists and turns in my career and ended up floundering in my late 20s and 30s, and then finding my way to social work school, the neuroscience that I would learn after social work school that took me to this place in this way that I work now as a therapist, as a trauma therapist who works in this particular model called accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy. And that brought me to the change triangle, which I'll get into in a moment. But I want to let everyone know that, like, I really thought I had it going on, and I thought I was going to be like this great, you know, I have this great career and I wanted to get married and have kids, and then boom, wrong career, left dentistry. My family thought it was the first time I ever was like, did a bad thing. I got married, had 2 kids, and then got divorced. And so I just kind of kept making mistakes and trying to figure it out. Didn't really know I was anxious until many years later, but in that 15-year period of trying to figure out my life, went through 2 clinical major depressions from stress, and you know, where your serotonin dips down. And really, I think what I want to really say about me is I was raised to think that if I could just keep it together, that my goal was to control my emotions, and that I could run faster and work harder and kind of be perfect and be together. And mind over matter was the mantra that I was taught I could do, and that was like an attainable goal. And then when you go through a depression, as I'm sure many of you know, because we're all humans and we all suffer. That was the first time I sort of was humbled by my feelings. And I was like, oh my gosh, I guess I have to pay attention to how I feel now. But I didn't know what to do with those feelings. I didn't have a language to explain to me what was going on. So in my family, when we'd get anxious, and you have a psychiatrist and a guidance counselor mother, we would try to have insight, like, what's making you anxious, try to figure it out. But I didn't have a language to really understand, as we're going to talk about in the change triangle, that anxiety is a signal and depression is a signal. It's not the end of the story, it's the beginning of the story, that there's meaning. And that meaning for me, was my experiences and the way that my emotions were being triggered, and then me trying to squash my emotions down and kind of keep trying to get ahead of them. So when I discovered, I went through 2 years of social work school, because at 39, I wanted to get through the fast track to becoming a therapist. And in New York City, the state of the art, like, I always wanted to be the best that I could be, and it was to become a psychoanalyst. So I went in and enrolled to go in to become a psychoanalyst, which is 4 years of training. And on the way to going in there, like a month before, a good friend of mine said, there's this woman, Diana Fosha. She's doing this interesting work with emotions, and I really recommend that you see her. And I found that there was this conference. It was an academic conference, so it was just for people in the profession. And at this conference, there were 4 speakers. One was Diana Fosha, who taught, who developed the type of therapy I do today. The other was Dan Siegel, who writes about brain integration and mindsight. And there were 2 other, they were all scientists. And because it was all science-based, it allowed me to take a look at stuff that my father really kind of called New Age BS. Like, he discredited emotions and like just thought that again, it wasn't like strong. It was like soft or something. And at that conference, this triangle flashed up on the big auditorium. And in that moment, I understood myself in a whole new way. I became organized. And I was like, 1, this is so helpful. Why did I not see this before? I had the best education that money could buy. Why was this cordoned off? And so that became curious to me. But then I was really jazzed to start studying. It's where I first got exposed to the concept of trauma theory and emotion theory. And it's all based in attachment theory, and AEDP, this work that I do, is based in connection, because you can't begin to look at anything painful or vulnerable until there's some kind of safe connection to ground yourself, either inside or outside. And they go together. The more we can connect to ourselves, then the more we can connect to others. And there's a positive feedback loop in that. So suffice it to say, I started training in AEDP and all these trauma models like internal family systems therapy, somatic experiencing, EMDR, all of left brain, right brain stuff that all had to do with the body. And that was the missing piece, that because I was
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
In that part, like in that moment where, or I don't know if this is true, but the way that you're telling this story, it seems like there was a really powerful moment in time, like at that conference when you saw the triangle, and I heard you say like all of this, it sounds like kind of like triggered this cascade of understanding. And then from there, you went on to explore AEDP and these different therapeutic models. And I'm feel really curious about, was there anything like, what was the effect in your personal life at that time, if you're open to sharing that?
Yes. Well, I had just met, so I got divorced probably 12 years before that, ruined my children's lives, felt like a complete failure and loser. And then, it was a shit show with raising adolescents, but I met this at the same time, I met this new guy that I've been married to for 15 years. And he had like 20 years of therapy. And he basically said, look, I'm just looking for like someone who's either had a ton of therapy or a therapist so that we can basically just process stuff together. And I was like, that's what I want to, I didn't even know what that really meant before all the AEDP stuff. I just don't know. I don't know what land I was living in, but it was like really an awakening. And so it really affected, primarily this new relationship. And I had close to—
it sounds like emotions, like waking up for the first time and being allowed to be present in you and your relationships.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was always a relationship person, and I always had a couple of good friends. I'm kind of shy. I don't have a lot of friends, but I always was a one-on-one type of person. And it just, I sort of started telling everyone about the change triangle, my best friends, my sister, my family, and John, my husband. And they went on the journey with me. And now, my best friend Monica is involved in the AEDP Institute. And, it's just,
wow.
I feel like they all have to be involved in SeekHealing. And it just feels like this big swelling of, that there's a change, there's a shifting, and we're all trying to turn the tides.
Yes.
And this change triangle was basically, it's the best tool after voraciously reading everything that I could in psychology. It's the best tool that I've come across to teach emotion education as a concept, which doesn't really exist. Like I just had another article in the New York Times with a collaborator that was a very vanilla article, but I asked if they could change my byline instead of psychotherapist to emotion educator. And the editor said, what's an emotion educator? And I told her, and she's like, okay. And so I'm like,
nice. That's a good win.
I feel like it's like creating a space for non-binary, and it's like creating a space for like, how we're just creating space for
normalizing the fact that we need to be teaching each other and children especially about emotional awareness and just how to be a part of our experience.
Yeah,
that's one of the things that continues to strike me the more that I learn about your work is your commitment to democratizing the information. I mean, for those of you who don't know, Hilary has written a really, it's not long, it's a really clear, succinct book that kind of summarizes how this tool and how to use it. And I just appreciate so much it seems to come through you and everything that I read about you and every time I talk to you about just how important it is to just get this information out there and empower people to start living emotionally.
Yeah, and I think the main point home is that, and this was for me and certainly for the people that I work with, is that emotions are painful, but stubbing your toe is painful too. And they're you get hurt and there's like a wave that starts to come up of pain. And then, like when you stub your toe, that you're going to feel the worst of it, and then it's going to come down and feel better. So the idea of demystifying emotions, like this is what it looks like to process trauma. This is what it looks like to actually feel a core feeling like anger and sadness, and that emotions just are. You're not bad for having them. You're not broken for having them. We all have them. They're automatic programs. So it's not whether you
they always behave this way with the wave and the peak and the decline and
exactly. And so when you demystify them, so in the book, it's basically like being transparent. This is what it looks like. This is everything you need to know about emotions so that you don't have to be frightened. They're very predictable, in fact. Even processing trauma has a predictability to it, even though everyone is completely unique, but we all are so similar. We all have the same brain that's evolved for hundreds of thousands of years. So for me, as I was learning about emotions, I was able to do a lot of this work even on my own. And that I found to be very interesting, that I just needed to know what was happening and I could follow this path. And the change triangle is both a map for how to get from for how you how we all become, how we suffer from the times that we're little kids and we have emotions and they're not received, or we're criticized, or we're hurt. And then we learn that it's not safe to have a feeling, and we block them, right? If the triangle is sort of on your body, there's a point. I should sort of feel like I should show a picture of this triangle instead.
I was going to say, can you walk us through the actual structure of it?
Yeah, let me just show it. And let me see if I can, okay. Let's see, view the slide. Is that going to work? Whoopsie. Okay, there. I have a couple of renditions. Yeah, so the idea is that if you go here to the bottom corner, that's where it all begins. So we have emotions. They're programs that are hardwired from the time we're born, and they evolved as survival programs to make us move. Emotion is derived from Latin and French word to move. So that, for example, if a wild dog was to burst into the room right here, our five senses would pick it up, right? Our five senses pick up the environment. It would trigger fear, and we would all start running if everybody had some wild animal busting into the room where they are now. And you wouldn't even know that you wouldn't think to yourself, I'm afraid, I'm going to run. It's happening automatically. So these emotions at the bottom that are called core emotions are fear, anger, sadness, joy, excitement, disgust, and sexual excitement. And these are all about how to run or fight from what's not good for you, and to move closer to what feels good and to what is new and generative and novel. And so it all starts at the core emotions. So, and these are not under conscious control. And that's, if you take two things from this talk, take that emotions just are, so you should never feel bad about having them. They get triggered in the middle of the brain, and then they activate the whole body, going down to the vagus nerve, which activates every nerve in the body to make you move, so that you run to safety, and then you're safe, and you can kind of scan the environment and say, I'm safe, I can come out. What just happened? If some animal came in. So what happens when we're young is we come out with these emotions just ready to go. And if you look at a newborn or a young child before they have inhibition, they let you know when they're angry. They let you know when they're sad. They let you know when they're excited. So as adults now, if we just flash forward to that, when we have an emotion, we have two choices. There's a fork in the road. We can bury that emotion, and then we move up. We're going up the triangle into this top area, which is where most of us live our lives, which is between these other types of emotions whose job is to keep us connected to other people in this kind of, in the way that if I'm a little girl and I am expressing anger, because my mother took my toy, or let's say I'm a little bit older and I'm expressing sadness because my parents are getting divorced, and that sadness or that anger isn't received. In fact, I'm actually humiliated for it, or I'm neglected for it, or I'm told that to get over it.
I now can't.
Then I'm going to use one of these inhibitory emotions of anxiety or shame or guilt to hold that emotional expression down because it's too painful to express it, and I'm too overwhelmed in my body and mind to contain the energy that emotions have. So I just kind of shut down. And anxiety, shame, guilt are kind of 3 different ways we shut down, and why we use one or another's genetics, disposition, experience. But then when you have these core emotions that are activating the body with all these affecting my stomach and my lungs and my heart and getting me ready for movement, and then I have this, it's like a pressure cooker, this downward push. We then use these, we move over to the triangle, over to the defense side, which is basically these brilliant ways that we spare ourselves from going mad, or from dying, or from feeling such incredible pain that we can't function. And defenses are, I'm just going to put up because it's sort of so interesting to kind of see that these global defenses that we use they work. And they work when we're younger, when we have our brains can't, we don't know what's going on, and we have to do the best that we can do. And then what happens is, as we get older, they start to cost us. They cost us from the get-go, but we have no choice because we're living in our families of origins. But now we have all these we have habitual ways of disconnecting from ourselves to spare us pain, but they cost us our relationships, and they cost us a feeling of being whole and being full and feeling our true selves. So the change triangle is the route to know. We travel around this triangle all throughout the day, and then on a macro level all throughout life. When we can notice the way we're using defenses and understand how to work back down, how to transform our anxiety and shame and guilt, lower it, right? We don't deepen that. The goal is to get down and identify these emotions again, and then process them through, which means naming them. So I know if I'm angry, if I'm angry, let's say my husband does something to really annoy me, I want to know how that anger, I want to, first of all, to be able to say, I am really pissed. And then I want to say, I know I'm pissed because I have this hot fire in my belly and I feel like slugging him. I think he's on the phone with us. And then I want to be able to stay with that impulse inside me without being scared of it. And that's the work, right? This is over a lifetime. I want to be able to stay with that energy and say, this impulse, which all emotions have, they have these pulls for action, as I mentioned, makes me want to slug him. And I can discharge that energy in a safe way that's non-destructive to me, where I'm not holding it in, or I'm not reaching for a drug or a drink, or I'm not becoming grandiose, or I'm not cutting myself, and I'm not abusing him and doing anything destructive to the relationship. And some of the way, this is all in the book in stories about how we do this, but we do it using fantasy, which I think we mentioned in the listening training at some point. I can imagine, and when you, again, this takes some practice, but when you can stay with the body and let, in fantasy, like it's a movie, not making it up in your head, but letting the body has the program, and it will tell you what it needs to do to release. Or just staying with the physical feeling, like in meditation. In a way, this is like meditation with a map, so that I will stay with my anger, or I'll stay with my sadness in my body, dropping the storyline, dropping the beliefs and all the stuff up here, approaching myself always with kindness, radical compassion, and curiosity. and my emotions will move through me some of the time. And when they don't, I resort to other ways to calm myself and soothe myself. But this is the way that trauma, this is the map in the space of safe connection, either to yourself or to somebody else, and seek healing, or to a therapist, that we repeatedly process current and old emotions to drop down into the state that we all want to spend more time in, which in the jargon is a regulated nervous system in homeostasis. And in the change triangle is the open-hearted state of the authentic self, which is marked by these C words that help us remember them. We feel calm in that open-hearted state. We're curious in the world, and we're curious in ourselves. We're connected to ourselves or others or nature. We can access compassion, and we feel confident in the way that we can do things in the face of fear, courage in the face of fear, and the mind calms down. And that's the whole shebang. And then you practice it over a lifetime, and you learn. You do that. The stories that I had to put in the book so you can bring it to life, because one of the problems with emotions is you can't think your way through an emotion. You have to experience it. And the big leap here is the drop out of the head into the body. And that was my second epiphany when I went to my first AETP training, which is when we broke up into groups of 3s, and the prompt was, how you're feeling being at this training. The kind of the pretend therapist asked me, and I said, I'm anxious. And their prompt was to say, how do you feel that anxiety in your body? And I remember that moment when I was panicked that if I actually turned toward that feeling in the fluttering in my chest, and my rapid heartbeat, that it would increase my anxiety and I would go out of control. But I trusted, and I leaned in, and the anxiety went down. And that was like, wow. And that's often, I would say 85, 90% of the time, that's what happens. So that's the beginning of getting into the body. And again, the book is a self-help book. So there's gentle exercises. We work the whole change triangle together. You get some no jargon science to understand why you're doing what you're doing. You get a story of that's like a heartfelt story of working the change triangle. And then you get a little exercise to gently dip your toe in the water. And you work it as much as you can. And when you get stuck, you need somebody else to be there with you.
Yeah, and what I love about this is just how clear and simple it is in just putting words to and creating a map for an experience that all of us have felt in some way, shape, or form, but maybe haven't either accepted as okay, or been able to understand in a way that makes sense. Yeah.
The thing is, it's universal. We all have, men, women, every gender in between. We have the exact same core emotions, and that's another thing that I like about the model. Now, you may not feel as parceled out in this as like I do, because I've been working in this triangle for so long. What happens often is people have a clump of emotions and trauma that come up, and then we kind of slow down, right? Because you can't work the change triangle unless you slow down, you ground and breathe, all this stuff that's related to, what you're doing at Seek Healing, same type of thing. And then, as you try to slow down, really ask, sometimes I go through the list. Do I feel when I'm activated, when I'm triggered, am I afraid? Check. Am I angry? Yeah, check. Am I excited? Yeah, maybe check. You can be all these emotions, but you have to sort of imagine them. I tell people, imagine your body grows bigger and bigger. So each emotion stands alone and there's lots of space in between. Or you can think of it as buckets. there are people who just start crying when any type of kind of interaction happens. They just get overwhelmed. And so we'll look at, how much, is there a bucket of anger? Is there a bucket of shame? And is there a bucket of sadness? And often those three things go together, because when we're with our feelings, sometimes shame gets bonded to emotions, and you can't actually have the emotion without the shame coming up until you teach your brain how to separate it out, because it got linked together. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. Yeah. And so do you recommend using it in that way in practice when a difficult or any emotion is actually alive in the present moment? So, I'm having a big emotional experience, something just triggered me into whether it's anger or joy or excitement. Is that the best time to use the triangle, or can it also be used when, we're just unpacking something that is more like long-standing emotional material to work through?
Absolutely both. As soon as I have a feeling, I'm working the change triangle. But if I have a behavior, I wrote about something about a year ago on my blog that was, again, it had to do with my marriage. I really am trying not to repeat. I can't stand when I find myself repeating the same kind of negative behavior. And I called the article 5 Minutes in a Car, transforming my angry tightness, because when I get vulnerable, I was raised to be strong. So when I feel vulnerable, or if I have a need, like I need attention, or if I feel sad, I for years, I would just get in a bad mood. I would just be bitchy and angry, and I would feel all tense. And there was just a moment, again, I don't know why it happened. It was like an epiphany where I was like, I am not going to behave badly. I'm not going to pick a fight with my husband. He's so sweet. It was that he wanted to do something nice for his father, and he forsook me to take care of his 90-year-old father. And I just felt myself going into the state, like, my me, and that type of thing. And I just turned inward, and I stayed with the anger, and it shifted. And I had a vision of myself as a young kid needing attention, and I stayed with that, and I cried, and I felt myself melt. But that's rare. That was like real therapizing myself. But I would say you just keep trying to work, it's a practice, not a perfect. So with anything you're learning, you just keep practicing it. And when you get stuck and you want to work on some long-standing trauma or some defense that you really can't imagine loosening, right? Because we don't get rid of defenses. These are parts of us that have served us. They've protected us. We just want to begin to add flexibility, another way to behave that feels more vulnerable, that feels more connected to a deeper need, a deeper emotion, and just begin to experiment. But I think it starts with the education. It just starts with a left brain. What are emotions? How do they work? How does trauma work? Let me learn that. And then let me just take a little taste where I want, right? You're not forcing anyone. Some people just want to understand, and that's good enough. And some people want to start practicing it. And some people want to take it to the limit and go have trauma therapy with an AEDP therapist. And some people will just want to practice it in SeekHealing.
Yeah, I can really see how you can use it iteratively to dive deep into something, into some core woundings or deep traumas, and work through something in that way, as peeling the onion back, or just
it's the onion, right? Layers and layers and layers.
Yeah. I'm struck by how much it does fit so beautifully and smoothly into a lot of the practices that we do in SeekHealing meetings, and using the tools that we practice with in listening training. It's just really well suited for that. And what's something that's striking me right now is what a great tool this could potentially be for our space owls. Some of whom are in here. Cameron was introducing us earlier that, when we step aside with someone, who's having a difficult time, I think for a lot of us, when we go through the volunteer training and we volunteer to do that, it can feel a little bit scary being with somebody in a big emotional experience. And I think there's this narrative in our culture that if someone is having an experience like that, they need to see a therapist or a professional. And while there's certainly, a time and a place for that, it's also true that we can hold each other in those moments. And I think, especially being able to use a tool like that in those moments might be really helpful to just say, well, what is the feeling I'm experiencing right now? And move through, like, is this a core emotion or is this the inhibitory emotion? And what are my defenses to it in this
Exactly.
moment?
Just to be able to begin to identify where one is. And you know, people have adapted the stuff in the book. I produce a ton of free resources on my website and on the Change Triangle YouTube channel that people have adapted into like youth groups. And I've gotten like great feedback, you know, that like they teach it and they start the groups. It's not dissimilar again to what you're doing in Seek Healing, but they are naming emotions, they're naming sensations. And that this one facilitator, a group facilitator said, you know, she overhears their teenagers saying, you know, I think that's a defense, you know, like, what if you move that over? What are you really feeling? And it's like, yeah, that's amazing. Right. So
I
that's
can only just wishing that I had that kind of language when I was a teenager or growing up as a child.
Too. And I hope, you know, my fantasy is that they'll teach the Change Triangle in like high school bio or health. You know, we have biology. We learned we had an esophagus, and that's great. I guess I need to know that, but it'd be really nice to understand my emotions, since those are the things that get me into trouble.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. I had one question that come up, which is around when we get, I'm just curious how you would, or if you would explain emotional spirals that we can get into. In listening training, we talk about the waves. That image is really resonant for me, and it's how I normally think about my experience of emotion. That, you know, something triggers us to experience an emotion. It begins, it rises, it peaks, and it declines if we can ride it all the way through, as you said. And I know all of us, any human has had the experience of being at the peak of that emotion and getting triggered again, and a whole new wave getting created. And actually, now that I'm saying it out loud, I'm imagining that re-triggering process, is that when we get into inhibitory emotions? Is that
probably because it's not? Yeah, absolutely. I think what happens is the emotion comes up and then it's like, oh, this is scary. This is overwhelming. I'm going to be out of control. I'm embarrassed. I don't know what I look like. I look terrible when I'm crying. I don't want someone to see me angry. And then there's inhibition. And so
or
then,
even the happy emotion, like I get to the peak of my, oh, I'm getting really excited. And then I get self-conscious, like, oh, I shouldn't have behaved like that, or I shouldn't have expressed myself that way.
Totally. And one of my favorite things is you can help people restore, you know, you can come from sort of working with like what they call negative emotions. You know, I think all emotions are sort of positive, but my favorite thing is to help, the other way to do it is to help people feel expansive and to help them have positive emotions, meaning, you know, if someone shares a compliment or something good that happens, you know, if you ask someone to make a little space to just notice what that feels like inside, oh my God, the inhibitions, like no, the eye rolling, the shrugging of the shoulders, the changing of the subject, it's so hard. And it makes sense because when we feel good, we physically feel bigger. And evolutionarily, when we're bigger, we could get shot, you know, you're like above the fray. And also all the messages about like, don't be too big for your britches and I'll be conceited. So absolutely, there's a tremendous amount of inhibition, but again, you keep working it, you know, we're expanding capacity to tolerate all these feelings, and it's practice and it's safety. So yes, so when there is a re-triggering, there's probably something happening with inhibition, then you stop, right? We don't deepen. In AEDP, we deepen core emotions and help somebody ride the wave all the way to completion, like you said. And if it's interrupted because there's too much anxiety coming up, it's totally fine. We stop, we slow everything down, connect, ground and breathe to lower the anxiety. And then you think we could go back to where we just were. And it's called pendulating in the trauma literature, back and forth, and you're slowly building capacity, like when you go to the gym and you lift a little more weight each time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's reminding me even what we were just talking about in the listening training this morning about how important it is to take that pause, and to normalize for each other that we can take a pause when we're feeling overwhelmed, when an emotion comes up. Just starting to make that more of a normal experience in connection and conversation, to draw our attention to what is happening right now. What's going on for you right there? What's this thing that's coming up for you?
Exactly. And you know what we say in AEDP is slower is faster. And it's in life, you know, all these things, it's so hard to do because anxiety speeds us up. And to be able to start to notice when we get sped up, or when we're starting to escalate or starting to get dysregulated, and pull back from that, right? That takes such mindful awareness. In fact, as a side note, one of the greatest, this pandemic really sucks, but one of the good things about it is the awareness that I think it's helping with people's spatial awareness of what, you know, germs and how you transfer things in your hand. And there's so much awareness, and awareness is really the key to everything, because you can't change anything until you're aware of it. So that idea of being aware when you're escalating in a fight with a relationship, or going down the tubes, and just trying to be like, okay, I've been here before. Do I have any choice? Even though it's so hard to make a different choice and to like rip those brain cells, is what I imagine. It's like, take those brain cells and just stretch them and just try something new, even if it feels so wrong. And then see how that felt afterwards. It was a better choice.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of that Viktor Frankl quote. I don't know if you've ever heard that growth is all about widening the gap between stimulus and response.
I think I just posted that on my Instagram like a week ago.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Same wavelength.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if it would be appropriate, or if you can maybe guide us through like what it would look like to use the triangle in a moment. I recall that was maybe something that you were interested in exploring tonight. Is that right? Kind of.
Yeah, I mean, we could either do questions if people want to ask, to make sure there's time for questions, or what I think we talked about, like a little bit of a role play. Before you got here, I sent everybody the New York Times article, It's Not Always Depression, that the book then came from that, just to give an example of kind of, it's a pithy example and well edited of what the whole thing looks like. But it's up to you. I'm not quite sure. I actually have so much in writing in my blog and everything like that I welcome people to check out and to subscribe. I send an article once a month they're all stories, because you have to show it through example, so it's not just a two-dimensional representation of something.
Yeah, that was my experience when I was first familiarizing myself with your work. I was what landed for me the most was when I read a story. Oh yeah, that's how it. And I'm seeing in the chat here that I think people are interested in role play. So if you're open to that, maybe let's start there, and then we can see what questions people have.
That sounds great. So do you want to do it with you and me?
Yeah,
I mean,
let's do it.
you'll be the person sharing, and I'll be the one guiding the change triangle.
That sounds good to me.
Yeah. That sounds great. So I guess what I would ask, Jen, is what would you like to be with today?
Well, what is most real and alive for me is that I feel I guess it's a little bit of shame or anxiety around my technical difficulties being present here. And yeah, just a feeling of and excitement and connecting with you. Like there's a lot of curiosity there too. I've been following our threads through this weekend and feeling your interest in this work and tracking that. So those are the two experiences that I'm most in touch with right now.
Well, I mean, congratulations. You just worked the triangle so well. But what I would say is, so I'm hearing that you're noticing some shame from earlier. You're noticing some anxiety. You're excited, and these are all entry points. So I I would say if we really slow down for a second and you feel your feet on the ground, and maybe take a couple of these deep belly breaths where you breathe in, let your belly come out like a big Buddha, and then blow out like you're blowing on hot soup for this nice long exhale. Yeah, and just a couple of those as you feel your feet on the ground. And if you just gently scan your body from head to toe and toe to head, what are you aware of right now in your body? Again, without any judgment, without any evaluation, if you just are kind of curious and kind to yourself, what are some of the things you're experiencing that tell you that the tumult of what you describe? Yeah.
It's like some shakiness in my fingers.
Mm-hmm.
And I can feel like the pit of my stomach, which I don't think is an actual organ, but
Mm-hmm.
there's like a dark kind of gravity in the middle of my stomach.
Mm-hmm.
And as I'm breathing, as you were like inviting me to breathe, I noticed relaxing in my muscles, like especially in my shoulders.
Mm-hmm. Great. So you notice so much, this sense of a pit in the stomach, and a little bit something in your fingers, which I'm gonna go with that for a moment. And I guess the pit in your stomach, is that a familiar feeling? It's painful. Would you be able to build on that? Would you call that anxiety?
Yeah, it's at the root of anxiety. It's definitely there when I have and still do sometimes experience panic attacks, and
Mm-hmm.
that feeling is present when that happens. Not in the way it is now, but in like a more acute way.
Yeah.
It feels like dread a little bit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if you just notice the edges of that, right? So that's uncomfortable. I don't want you to go in it, but almost like if you just kind of gave that some loving attention, and almost like you could either move it aside or even like go right through it. Do you have a sense of what core emotions might be there? And if it would help, I can kind of go through them and you can just kind of see what you can identify. And if you can't identify any of them, that's fine.
Sure. I think, without remembering the full list, fear is probably the one.
Yeah. So some fear.
And as I say it, I feel like a pulsing in that place. Like I can almost feel my heart beating in the pit.
Yeah. So it's responding to the naming of it. You're saying something about labeling it as fear?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's hold that. Is there any anger there too?
I don't think so, but anger feels like one of the more difficult emotions for me to identify.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay. Is there any sadness there?
Maybe.
Okay. Right. Maybe some sadness. Is there any joy there?
Not in the pit feeling, but if we go back to the fingers,
okay.
I might that might be.
Yeah, and
Am I
that's where
jumping around too much?
we might have gone there equally as well. And is there any excitement in the pit?
Again, not in the pit, but I think in the fingers, or in some part of my experience right now, there's excitement.
Okay. So there's a lot going on, a lot going on. And and then I would really want to say where, what feels right for all these things, all the whether the fear, and then you mentioned the fingers, we've got a lot going on. What feels right to be with, or what would you want to be with if and I'm aware of time also, but we would pick, one of these things and just be with it. In the fear, I'm curious about, I don't know if, but again, I wouldn't want to rush. I'm just feeling like caring for you, Jen, to go there right now.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah. And in fact, it makes me think for this demo, we would stay with the fingers. There's some, I heard maybe some joy and excitement there.
Yeah, that feels maybe like a little bit easier to
Yeah.
explore. Although even just in this little process we've been going through with the fear, I'm just realizing the fear of, it's like a fear of not, it doesn't feel too edgy to name. I feel like all these people we've been here with all weekend, it's like a fear of not doing a good enough job, not doing well enough.
Yeah. And so that makes me curious too, a little bit, like, how do you tell that that's fear and not anxiety? Like, what's the fear? What would happen if you didn't do a good enough job?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. It just feels scary.
Yeah. Huge. I don't blame you. Yeah. Yeah. So, and then I would probably, if we were together in a room, we would really stay with, I would ask you what in your body helps you notice that you're feeling fear. If we could, to see if there would be some differentiation from the pit, which feels like anxiety, which sounds like anxiety. And then fear being core, we could stay with and move and see, it might take you back in time into your childhood. It might be morph into something else. Again, like pressure, because you're doing something big that I would just want to get very curious about it and stay with it until it's sort of manifested. But that's more, AEDP. So with the triangle, basically what we did before was basically knowing, all these different places of where you were, and that was quite excellent, I want to say. Well done.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I'm aware of how we could, there's like a fork in the road, almost like we could keep going into it, because I, just in my own awareness of my emotional makeup and past, I am aware of that fear and like ideas of where it comes from. And I'm noticing how just naming it is, as you were talking about before, like already dissipating the experience a little bit, and having me feel dropped into being here with you, which is amazing.
Yeah. Thanks for doing that.
Yeah, thank you for leading me through it in a way that feels somehow intimate, even though we're here with lots of other humans. Yeah, so I guess I'm wondering if we want to take any questions from the group. And Cam, you might have a little bit better access to the chat than I do. Would you mind seeing if there's some questions in there that we can presence from the rest of the room?
I'm looking at some of these questions. Oh yeah, someone is typing. That's true. I would like to do some role play. Shame, unworthy. You know, someone commented about shame. Shame is such a, that's another thing I just want to say is that, and they mentioned it this morning, shame is such another important emotion to learn about. We all have it. It's learned in a context, right? We're not born feeling ashamed for the things we're feeling ashamed for. So it's connected to a story, and it is so insidious and so painful. And I think a lot of depression is shame. People call depression, because it's such a visceral, excruciating experience of coming inward. And shame binds to everything. It binds to emotions, it binds to ideas, it binds to ideas about ourselves. And we really have to understand the root of we have to understand the story. And so it's very important, the concept that when you feel when shame comes up, to understand that it's a part of you, not all of you. Very, very crucial. And to really try to get some separation to see that part that is collapsing. And
yeah, it feels like a big light bulb for me too, to name the difference between these core emotions and inhibitory emotions, because shame is one of the inhibitory ones, right? It's this, and that's kind of, it feels to me that's what gives it this insidious nature of being able to, you can get lost in the spiral that it creates.
Yeah, shame is a big one. Anxiety is a little bit sort of easier to recognize, and guilt is sort of an interesting one too. That's, you know, guilt is I've done something bad. Shame is I am bad, and
like the inability to separate the parts.
Yeah, that it is something wrong with you, and of course we're all just fine. What wasn't fine was something that happened to us, but we internalize when we're young, if we're not treated well or we feel bad, because we're not treated well or bad things happen and nobody can help explain to us. Like really trauma, as we say in AEDP, is when you have overwhelming emotions along with too much aloneness, unbidden aloneness. And so that's where you start to not be able to cope, you can't process your emotions, and then you start to ride up the triangle and develop symptoms.
Symptoms being those, as we move into the defenses.
Defenses and symptoms are the same thing. They're just, the symptoms are actually the brilliant communications that say something isn't right. Something went wrong. And we, have to hold on to the belief there's nothing wrong with us. We just feel that that's true. But
I appreciate so much how you always name the defenses as brilliant and intelligent. It's so true. They're just really, they're so intelligently designed by us unconsciously.
Yeah, and they work.
Yeah,
they work at the time, and then until they don't feel so good anymore.
Until they don't serve us.
Right. And then when you give them up, it's so vulnerable, because they're like armor. They bathe us, and even though we might be miserable, at least it's familiar. But it's to relinquish that and to go into vulnerability and to go into feeling something takes a lot of courage, and again, that's where the education just keeps coming back. If I know what to expect, it's less scary. Like before I'm going to ski down a slope, I just want to know what's in the way, what trees, skis, how fast I'm going to go, and it might be a little bit, still be scary, but at least I'll feel a little bit like I can, the brain wants to predict and know what's going to happen, so that helps.
Right, exactly. That's why I often, or in the language that we use around here, talk about bonding with those things, because you're really creating a relationship that is painful to let go of. When the time comes to let go of it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I'm becoming aware of time here, and aware that I feel like I could just keep talking to you all night. And a lot of gratitude for that.
I am so grateful. I can't thank everyone enough for coming and listening. And I hope you'll stay connected and visit my website and read through the blogs. They're not timely. They never go out of style because it's all about just the human experience, going through different defenses and different, it's all about relationships and the change triangle and the connection to ourselves. And so you can like sift through and just take what you want, share it with others, and just share the emotion education. And the book,
yeah, and I'll say that your book is available it's not very expensive at all and available on Amazon. Is that right?
It's available everywhere, and you can get it at the library, and you can just, and I really wrote it to be a beach read. I just didn't want it to be boring. I wanted it to be a page turner. I didn't want there to be one word that you wouldn't understand, and mostly stories that are heartfelt. I still cry when I read some of them, and and so graciously permitted by the people that I work with to write about them. So there's deep gratitude. My patients have taught me everything that I know, and I'm so deeply, deeply grateful for all my experience and all my training.
Well, and thank you for bringing that wisdom from them to us, and bringing this tool and for your presence and this connection that we're building. I'm really grateful. I'll follow up with you after this because I would love to find some time to just kind of integrate all of this and maybe talk sometime next week.
We will, and I hope everybody takes listening training, and I just can see this going worldwide, and I also hope everybody donates even a tiny small amount, because it seems like I can't imagine an organization. I never met an organization that offered free services, free training, and was doing peer support, that it could go on forever. And I sent you an article because I wrote something for NAMI on peer support, where people read the book together and it's a way to get to know people. So it's a great book group type thing too, where you can read it. I really wanted people to read the book together and share and go through the exercises. And so it's like a little group for them.
Yeah, I think there's a lot for us to discuss there as far as potential.
Exactly. Okay.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining. Enjoy the next session, and please do make a donation if you feel called to do so. Thank you. Thanks, Hilary.
Bye, all.
Bye.
Bye.